Welcome back to CP24. Today marks 100 days since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. In Tel Aviv, hundreds of people were holding yellow balloons, standing in silence for 100 seconds today, marking this milestone in the deadliest and longest war between Israeli and Palestinian factions since the founding of Israel in 1948. Now, those who gathered at this site called on Israel to do whatever it can to secure the release of the 100-plus remaining hostages still believed to be held in Gaza. The fighting first erupted after an attack by Hamas on Israel on October 7th, killing at least 1,200 people. And in the 100 days since, the war has reduced much of the Gaza Strip to ruins. By estimates, about 70% of the housing stock has been destroyed. The health ministry in the besieged territory says the death toll is approaching 24,000 people, and more than 64,000 Palestinians have been wounded. It's believed nearly 2 million people, almost 90% of the population, have been internally displaced by war. Now, for more on this grim milestone, we're joined live now by Nader Hashemi. He's with the Middle East politics. He's a Middle East politics professor, I should say, at Georgetown University. So, Nader, first of all, thank you for joining us, and I hope you can help us take stock of where we are now and where we're headed. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying in his address today, no one, as he put it, not the Hague, not the axis of evil, no one will stand in the way of Israel winning this war against Hamas. So what does that pledge spell for the next 100 days and beyond?
I think it means more of the same, devastation, horror, population displacement, war crimes, and fundamentally insecurity for both Israelis and Palestinians. And I think that's really the key ingredient here that needs to be emphasized as we sort of look back over the last 100 days. There can be and there will never be, ultimate security and safety for Israelis at the expense of the Palestinians. And unfortunately, I think the solution here doesn't lie within the region, it lies outside of the region. I think Israel is able to carry on in this way because it knows it has near unconditional support from the West. And until that support sort of shifts and pushes Israel in the right direction to realize that it can't pursue policies that we've been seeing, not just since October the 7th, but more importantly before then, that comes at the expense of the security of the Palestinian people, then we're locked into this perpetual cycle of violence that fundamentally destabilizes the region, drags the West in, and produces the conflict that we're seeing.
Well, let's just talk a little bit more about that perpetual downward cyclonic cycle. Now, there are differing opinions. You do talk about particularly the United States when it comes to the international community alluding there. Now, there are differing opinions on how to resolve the conflict, even differences of opinion between the United States, the State Department, and members of Netanyahu's cabinet in Israel on what to do with Gaza after the war is conceivably over. So what do you see in terms of an end in sight and how to negotiate all of these different beliefs on what should happen with the Palestinian territories and Israel following this war?
Well, the United States and Israel and the international community, including the Arab world, seem very fixated on simply trying to find a solution for this conflict in Gaza after the end of hostilities. In other words, as long as Hamas is sort of defeated, we can have some sort of Palestine governing authority that doesn't include Hamas, and perhaps everything will be fine and dandy. But I think that's very short term and in many ways doesn't address the root causes of this conflict, that the problem here is not simply Gaza. The problem is you have roughly 7 million Palestinians living between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River who are living under either occupation or apartheid-like conditions. And that's unsustainable. So the discussions taking place in Washington, as you alluded to, I think are very short-sighted and short-term. They don't want to address the underlying roots of this problem. And the roots of this problem are much bigger and greater than simply what's happening in Gaza. And I think until that issue is addressed by the international community, and it's really the United States here that holds the cards, I don't think we're going to get anywhere better. And so that's why I'm very pessimistic about where this conflict is headed.
Well, Nader, let's just think a little bit more, as much as I understand where the pessimism could come from. But thinking about the future of the 2.3 million people in Gaza, let's not forget that of those over a million, 1.1 million of people that are in Gaza are children. Many of them have been killed. There's, according to Save the Children, the milestone is over 10,000 now. Roughly 1%, 1 in 100 children that live in Gaza have been killed. In the future, when you have that generation growing up, how do we stop that downward spiral that you were talking about before?
No, that's a great point. I mean, it highlights the human rights catastrophe in Gaza. It also highlights the longer-term picture that you have, 1 million children in Gaza who are bearing the brunt of this conflict. But I think your point about the younger population, not just among Palestinians, but in the region, these young people are radicalized by what they're seeing in Gaza over the last 100 days. This is, unfortunately, the big winner here in this equation is going to be radical extremism. It's going to be the forces of Al-Qaeda and ISIS who are going to be able to recruit much more easily. In the absence of a political path forward, in the absence of a serious peace process, in the absence of some hope, and there's very little hope on the horizon that I can see, in part because of the failure of American policy. American policy really has set the stage for this conflict, and I think the solution for the path forward also lies in the United States because they have the influence over the parties. But in the United States, there's very little sign that the Biden administration has a sense of the importance of what's happening and the need to sort of strike bigger for a larger international peace conference or some sort of radical change in policy that can push us in the right direction. So I'm very pessimistic about where this is heading, not just in the case of Gaza and Israel, but as we're seeing in the Red Sea, in Yemen, this conflict is spreading and it could destabilize not just the entire Middle East, but potentially the international system as well.
There's a lot to think about there, Nader. Thank you very much again for your time. Nader Hashemi is a Middle East politics professor at Georgetown University, joining us live on CP24. We thank you for your time, sir.
Thanks.